Be sure to subscribe to Viral now and click the bell so you'll never miss an upload of ours. Hi there everyone, my name is Jeremy Jameson here today with 10 famous people who were once homeless. These people are all inspirations, showing that you don't need to come from wealth in order to make it big. Let's get right into it. Jim Carrey, famous comedian who starred in some very iconic films, especially throughout the 1990s, such as Dumb and Dumber, The Truman Show, Ace Ventura, The Mask, Liar Liar, and a bunch more. With how beloved this funny guy is, surprisingly, not a lot of people know that he was, for some time, homeless. As a teenager at about the age of 15, his father Percy, who was a musician, later turned accountant, lost his job as an accountant, meaning he was no longer able to financially support the family. This resulted in the Carrey family losing their home, not being able to afford it, which brought them all to living in a van.
My father lost his job and I actually became homeless for quite some time. Of course, I grew up in Canada, so I thought we had just gone camping.
Jim had to quit high school, once again at the age of 15, to get a job as a janitor to help support his family. He's talked a bit about this before, as I showed that clip from the comedy routine, of which it is quite remarkable to be able to make jokes about a terrible situation, but in a more serious context, Jim has spoken about how he was very angry during this period of homelessness. Jim Carrey had always been practicing comedy. At the age of 19, got his first break becoming an opening act for a couple of well-known comedians at the time. But the first real break of success happened in 1991 with his own show Living in Color, which then led to truly massive success in 1994 with Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, and Ace Ventura all coming out that year. Jim Carrey is now one of the most well-known and beloved funny men in popular culture. Long gone are the days of living in a van down by the river. Phil McGraw, more commonly known as Dr. Phil, now a daytime television host where he talks with angsty, angry, and a myriad of other nasty adjectives of people to help figure out their problems affecting their family most often. Before all of that though, at age 12, Phil's father decided he wanted to pursue psychology. Made that choice sometime prior to clarify, but at age 12, landed a position as an intern psychologist. While this eventually ended up working out, at the time of the internship, Phil and his father were homeless, living in a car in Kansas City. They eventually were able to get a room at the YMCA for $5 a week. Then they went on to save up and rent a one-bedroom apartment that had no running water, no electricity, no heat, or air conditioning. Phil's dad eventually started his own psychology practice and became successful. Phil himself followed in his father's footsteps, joining his father's practice on top of getting his PhD. But Phil did not renew his psychology license in 2006, so is no longer legally a psychologist and cannot call himself one. Although of course that is the role he essentially takes on his own show, Dr. Phil. Steve Jobs, the co-founder and longest as well as most respected CEO of Apple, creators of the Mac computer, iPhone, iPad, and many more well-known technology devices, was once essentially homeless. While he struck rich at a young age, being worth over $1 million by age 23, a few years prior, Steve decided he wasn't getting anything of value to progress his life from college, so he dropped out. But he had spent all of his parents' money going to school, so there was no safety net to support him. This is what he did following his choice to drop out of school.
I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple.
While he was fortunate enough to have friends willing to let him sleep on the floor of their dorms, he did not have a home himself and barely enough food to get by for some time. While it was a tough time for sure, obviously it ultimately was the right choice as Steve Jobs alongside Steve Wozniak and Ronald Wayne founded Apple, the company with the highest worth today, bringing the market some very beautiful and efficient pieces of technology, sometimes pushing the envelope, sometimes just refining it. Colonel Sanders, the founder of KFC. For most of his life, he lived in poverty due to his father passing away at age 6, leaving him to help his mother cook and care for his siblings. In grade 7, he dropped out of school to work on a farm to help support his family even more so. At age 16, he snuck in and enlisted in the US Army, but was discharged a year later. Then he got a job as a railway laborer, but got fired for fighting with a co-worker. He then was pursuing a career in law, but had that ruined as he would get into more fights. This trend with all of his other jobs and business ventures continued for most of his life, forcing him to live in poverty, often without a home. After World War II, he pushed hard trying to have his chicken recipe sold, but it was rejected by over 1,000 different businesses and people. But he finally struck it big with KFC. As it became a big hit, he sold the company at the time for $2 million, which is worth over $15 million today. Despite not owning the company for too long, he was already an elderly man by the time he sold KFC, so he was set for the rest of his life. Finally able to rest and enjoy life until his death at age 90 in the year 1980. Sylvester Stallone, beloved actor for roles such as Rocky Balboa and John Rambo. As a struggling actor, he had to live in a car alongside his dog. In an interview, Sylvester told a story from that time. He said, "On our way from New York to Hollywood to seek our fortune, the heat became so intense that we had to pack old butt kiss in cracked ice for 2 days. I promised him that if we survived, he'd someday get treated like a king. But I almost changed my mind when he practically got us killed in a wildlife preserve. An exceptionally large ostrich decided to peck him to death and attacked the car. Rather than being diplomatic, Butkus jumped out in a counterattack, and I practically got slaughtered trying to separate them. By the time I got back in the old car for a quick escape, the thing stalled, and a herd of unhappy buffalo descended and attempted to get upset with the car with us in it. In the middle of all of that confusion, Butkus jumped in the back seat and went to sleep." Despite the strong relationship between Butkus and Sylvester, Sylvester was so poor for a little while that he had to sell his dog for $50 outside of a liquor store. It wouldn't be too long after, though, that Stallone became very rapidly successful with his breakout film, Rocky. Butkus was able to be bought back for $15,000, so he could also be in the movie alongside Sylvester and return to him. Steve Harvey, host of his own television show, host of Family Feud, among other well-known projects, was homeless for 3 years. In the late 1980s, Steve divorced from his first wife, resulting in him sending most of his small paycheck from comedy gigs to support his 2 children. As 2 of his regular comedy gigs fell through, Steve was left having to live out of his 1976 Ford Tempo. Sometimes he'd be able to sleep in a hotel when he landed a comedy gig and they were paying for a room. Otherwise, Steve would have to wash up in gas stations or swimming pool showers, as once again, he wasn't getting too many gigs for work, and any that he did get, almost all of the money went to his children. It would be in 1993 that Steve got the role as host for the television program Showtime at the Apollo, where various performers, established as well as amateur, would go up against each other and present in various ways. Since then, he's become successful with his self-titled show, being the Family Feud game show host. He also hosts his own radio show, he's published best-selling books, and much more. Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, famed actress and pop star with countless top-charting albums and singles, spent some time having to live without a home. At age 18, Jennifer was already heavily pursuing making it into the entertainment industry, except not as a singer, but as a dancer. Her mother did not approve of the direction Jennifer wanted to go with her life, so Jennifer was essentially forced out of her own home as she would not give up on her dream of becoming a dancer. So she slept on a couch at her dance studio for a few months. It would not be too long after, though, where she booked her first gig as a dancer in Europe. Her first break onto television was on In Living Color, Jim Carrey's show, in the year 1992 as Fly Girl, still as a dancer. In 1997, Jennifer portrayed murdered pop star Selena. This film really started Jennifer's career, leading her to her musical debut in 1999 with On the Six, leading to massive success in more films and music to this day. Chris Pratt, currently one of the most successful actors in Hollywood, starring in massive blockbusters, came from humble beginnings. At age 19, when he was living in Hawaii, which may sound luxurious, but is quite the contrary, as he was living in a van. It would be in this van that Chris would write his first script that he was able to sell and act in, called Cursed Part 3. He was paid $700 for the script. While he's reminisced about his time living in a van in Hawaii, he seems to remember that time quite fondly, as he did have a roommate, or I suppose a van mate, living with him. And at the young age of 19, having a dream of making it into Hollywood, everything was fun. Chris Pratt is now incredibly successful, going from the television show Parks and Recreation to now films like the Lego Movie, the Guardians of the Galaxy series, the Jurassic World series, and other films. Charlie Chaplin, the silent film star who made decades of people laugh without having to say a single word, grew up in quite the unfortunate situation. As a child, his father died, which resulted in his mother having a mental breakdown, leading them to poverty, not having any income nor a home. Charlie, at the age of 25 in 1914, landed his first role on a film that he considered deplorable, but he was too pulled in by the lure of Hollywood to object the role. It wouldn't be too long after arriving to Hollywood that on a set, the director of the film said it wasn't funny enough, so he asked Charlie to help. Charlie returned in baggy clothing and created his role, the Tramp, which is arguably his most iconic look. It stemmed from that time that he was a tramp himself, being poor. Charlie Chaplin, in his hilarious movements, went on to become very important in early Hollywood and inspired many people in the entertainment industry, even people such as Michael Jackson, who was enamored with Charlie's performances. Daniel Craig, the current James Bond, was once homeless. Despite his debut in the film industry being in the year 1992 with The Power of One, Mr. Craig's career didn't take off until his debut as Mr. Bond in 2006 with Casino Royale. In 2005, he was spotted multiple times sleeping on London Park benches. Even though with his career, while he wasn't a household name, he had been in big budget projects such as A Kid in Arthur's Court, Elizabeth, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, Road to Perdition, and Steven Spielberg's Munich. So it wasn't like he was only in small indie type films. Lo and behold though, in 2005, he was sleeping on public benches. It would be later that year where he landed the role as James Bond. He's been the Bond I've grown up with, and I'm sure many of you watching have as well. But when the casting for the next era with Daniel Craig was announced, fans of the entire James Bond series were very hesitant to have a rougher and blonder Bond. But that worry was dispelled with the release of Casino Royale in 2006 with Daniel's incredible performance, and ever since his career has taken off, becoming very well known and no longer having to sleep on benches. Well, thank you so much everyone for watching. For Viral Now, I'm Jeremy Jameson, wishing you to have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.